Erev Tov, good evening. I am Rabbi Emily Siegel. I'm the senior rabbi of Temple Chai, and it is a great pleasure to welcome all of you here in person and virtually for the Eckstein lecture from ASU Jewish Studies this evening. Just want to say what a pleasure it is to have the chance to learn together this evening and to welcome all of you and Dr. Eisen into this space for this evening's learning. And I won't take up any more of your time so we can move forward with our program. I'd love to invite forward Paul Eckstein to share some words.
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you all for being here. And thank you, some 200 folks, as I understand it, who are Zooming in. This is by my count, the 35th Eckstein lecture. It started in the late 80s, and I believe we've had one lecture each year. It seems that each lecture gets better and better and better. And having heard a preview and seen a preview of Arnie Eisen's talk last night, I know this is going to be an outstanding lecture. It was advertised, at least in one tagline, as, "Is there a future for Jews in America?" And when I mentioned that last night, Dr. Eisen said, "Well, yes, there is, and I'm not going to pretend that there's not." So I've revised my tagline to say, "Whither Jews in America?" This is an interesting time for Jews, to use the Chinese curse. And there is maybe 6 or 7 hours of lecture that is necessary to demonstrate all the ways in which it's an interesting time. So I believe it's my responsibility to invite Hava Samuelson to do the proper introduction. So Hava, the floor is yours. Thank you all for being here.
So good evening and welcome everybody who is here with us in person and all the people who are with us online. So I'm Chava Samuelson. I'm the Regents Professor of History, Irving and Miriam Lowe Professor of Modern Judaism, the Director of Jewish Studies at Arizona State University. We have most of you probably know that our program in Jewish Studies is a kind of a hybrid. It combines giving students a degree, a BA degree in Jewish Studies or a certificate in Jewish Studies, but we're really very committed to adult Jewish education, and we do programs, as you know, for all those years. So we do many programs that include lectures, research conferences, we have musical performances, we had several this year, and even historical exhibits. Now, it's my pleasure to collaborate with Temple Chai on this event that is our Albert and Liese Eckstein Scholar-in-Residence event. And we are doing it since 1988, which is quite unusual. For a long time, this program brought to ASU and to Phoenix people who introduce us to all aspects of the Jewish experience, whether it's history, religion, culture, sociology, politics, literature, you can go on and on. But several years ago, and I don't remember when it was, we decided to focus on American Jewry, right? I think it was just before COVID. And in consultation with the Eckstein family, this has been the focus for the last few years. And of course, we had to do it on Zoom because of COVID. And this year, we are very fortunate and very honored to introduce to you Professor Arnold Eisen, the former chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. That's, of course, in New York. So Professor Eisen is a scholar of modern Jewish thought. He's an interpreter of American Judaism. He's a constructive theologian, and he is a leader of conservative Judaism in America. He holds a BA from the University of Pennsylvania, a BPhil from Oxford University, a PhD from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He has taught at Tel Aviv University, at Columbia University, and at Stanford University. All of this he did before coming to JTS to become the chancellor of the institution in 2007. He served in this leadership position until 2020, when he returned to teaching and to scholarship as a full-time faculty member at JTS. During his tenure as chancellor, he transformed the education and training of religious, pedagogical, professional, and lay leaders in North America by creating programs that graduated highly skilled, innovative leaders who could bring Judaism alive in many ways that speak authentically to Jews at a time of rapid and far-reaching changes. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the programs that he put in place. He has emphasized that and managed to strengthen Jewish learning by reaching out, by making kind of an outreach of JTS scholarship beyond the campus and making the resources of the campus available to Jewish learners all over the world. He has made Morningside Heights campus, if you're familiar with that campus, into a center of inquiry, conversation, inspiration of Jewish community in North America. Here are some of the programs that he put in place: the expansion of access to the treasures of the JTS library through increased digitation. Then he put in place the online and on-campus courses for the public. Another program was the JTS Fellows Program to increase opportunities for adult learning. And yet the fourth program was development of a JTS Torah Online, a rich menu of videos, podcasts, and Torah commentaries. Everybody, of course, is invited to Google it up and use it. So these are some of his programs that he has done, that he has put in place. But throughout all those years, and even before he became the chancellor, he was also a very productive and prolific scholar. I'll just mention 3 books because I know that Paul doesn't like me to mention a long list of books when I introduce people. So here are some of only 3 of his very influential books. One is Galut, Modern Jewish Reflections on Homelessness and Homecoming. That's from 1986. Another book is Taking Hold of Torah, Jewish Commitment and Community in America. And a book that probably many of you have read, or some of you have read, is The Jew Within Self, Family, and Community in America, that was done with Stephen Cohen, the sociologist of American Jewry. In addition to all that work, he is a very also influential public intellectual. He has contributed to the Wall Street Journals, to the Jewish Week, to Huffington Post, to Tablet, to Fortune magazines. And he discussed in those semi-academic publication, it's not a publication, it's really reaching out to the public at large. He discusses education, Jewish philosophy, Jewish values. And he also has a blog, so you can look him up on Google by Googling On My Mind, Arnie Eisen. So clearly no one in the United States could be a better person equipped to explore this evening's topic, American Jewry Today and Tomorrow, Challenges, Opportunities, and Crises. So let's welcome Professor Eisen.
Thank you, Chava. It's great to be here. So when Chava and I came up with that title, when did we do this? Last June, I think it was, right? It was June. So we had no idea that the history of American Jews was about to change on October the 7th. How could we have known? And it occurred to me that I thought I had a title that was foolproof. American Jewry, today and tomorrow, right? And what happened in the meantime was that I was going to describe the today, but the today I was going to describe is now clearly yesterday. And I'm of the opinion that it's always hard to talk about tomorrow. Commentary Magazine had a symposium for their 50th anniversary a few years ago, and they asked a bunch of people, including me, to say what American Jewry was going to be like 50 years from now. And I said, this is a ridiculous question. And so I think it's just even before October the 7th, look at the variables you would have to know about in order to think about where American Jewry is going to be at 50 years from now. The first thing you'd have to know is, where's America going to be? Is America still going to be the dominant power in the world? Or is China going to be the dominant power? Are we sharing the world with China? What is the future of AI? What's going to be with gene splicing? What's going to be with climate change? And I added to that list what's going to be in the Middle East, not foreseeing that there would be massive changes in the Middle East only within this year. And so now, when you try to think about what American Jewry is going to be like 50 years from now, the variables just make it impossible. You can give an educated guess, and I'll try to say a few things about what's going to be. But I think more important than what we think it is going to be is what we should be doing to try to make it the kind of future that we want to have, rather than worrying about what's going to happen with all these different variables. And I think it's pretty clear to say, as I already said once, that our future is not the same as our past. That I really believe it sounds pretentious to think that you're living in historic times, but I think the future of Israel changed on October the 7th. I think the future of American Jewry's relationship to Israel changed on October the 7th. And therefore, I think that the future of American Judaism changed on October the 7th. Nobody I know thinks that we're ever going back to October the 6th. Right? So you have a massive change that happens, just like that, which nobody predicted really. And here we are trying to figure out what to do about it. I want to say that the framing of the topic had personal significance for me as well. So March of 2024 marks almost 49 years since I began studying American Judaism for my dissertation at Hebrew University, where Chava reminded me we first met in 1975. In 1999, which was 25 years ago, I was invited to give a talk in Ann Arbor to the University of Michigan, and I decided to make the topic of that talk what I had learned about American Judaism after 25 years of studying it. And now we're 25 years later. So I thought, okay, what I'm going to do tonight is reflect on what I've learned about American Judaism in 50 years, 49 years to be exact, of studying American Judaism. What generalizations can you make? How do I look at it now differently than I looked at it when I first started doing my PhD in 1975? We all know what's different. I mean, take the smartphone out of your pocket, right? And you know that that's different. And we all use the internet today probably, and that was 1994, right? And if you're looking at the particular history of Jews in America, imagine a Judaism where ultra-Orthodoxy had not yet taken off. Imagine a Judaism before the impact of feminism. Imagine a Judaism without the movements of spirituality and healing and social justice, which have been so huge in the last 25, 30 years. It's a very different community now than it was in 1999, let alone in 1975. And all the people who know about these things tell us that the changes that we're about to undergo in the next 25 years are going to be greater than the changes that have taken place in the last 25 years. So if that's the case, anybody that thinks they can talk about the future of Judaism 25 years from now, let alone 50 years from now, which is what an undergraduate asked me today, I tried to good-naturedly say, we can't predict even 10 years ahead. Tell me what's going to be with AI and how many jobs are going to be lost and transformed by AI? Millions, right? And are we all going to be using driverless vehicles 10 years from now, right? Are we going to have robots walking around the hallways with us? Tell me what's going to be, right? So there are a lot of these variables which are just impossible. And so I prefer to talk about what we think should be rather than what we think will be. I would have one more word of preface, which is you may have noticed that my title speaks about American Jewry, but most of what I've said is about American Judaism. I have worked with sociologists, and I feel like in order to understand any religion, you have to understand the sociological situation in which it's happening. It's part of culture. It's people thinking, they don't think in a vacuum. They're responding to certain challenges and conditions. So I don't think you can study American Judaism without knowing a lot about American Jewry. But by the same token, I have a opinion which is controversial in some circles, which is that some people think you can have a future for American Jewry without Judaism. And I think from historical perspective, that's absolutely a nonsensical hypothesis. You can't turn your back on what Jews have been for 2,000 years and maybe more than 2,000 years and think that you're going to have anything of substance called Judaism. So the idea of having a Judaism without Jews or Jews without Judaism to me is a non-starter. Non-starter. So I'm going to focus on what I know about, which is American Judaism, which is not institutions and organizations and demography, but I'm going to talk about religious beliefs and practices and the meanings to the rituals that we perform, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to talk about the sociology. I'm going to talk more about the religious thought and the religious practice. So with those introductions, I'm now going to launch into the subject. And maybe paradoxically, for what I just said, I decided to start with 3 bits of sociology. Because when I began my studies at the Hebrew University in 1975, first of all, I'm departing from the script to tell you that my decision to study Jewish thought from America in Israel in 1975 was not welcome for many people. And there were professors at the Hebrew University who said, he cannot study American Jewish thought here because there's no American Jewish thought worth studying. And my supervisor, who was a very wide-ranging professor, had to convince his colleagues to let me do a PhD in the Department of Jewish Thought that focused on America. And since then, there have been many. But when I got my job teaching at Tel Aviv University in 1984, I was the first person to teach American Jewish thinkers at Tel Aviv University. Abraham Heschel had not been taught. Mordechai Kaplan had not been taught. Joseph Soloveitchik had not been taught. Not to mention Eugene Borowitz, Emil Fackenheim, and lesser figures, but this was new. And so there I was in Israel trying to figure out a dissertation that would get me to the heart of American Jewish thought. And I did a kind of a search in the library. I read everything I could get my hands on of religious thought that had been produced in the United States between around 1920 and 1970. And there was one idea which more than any other idea claimed the attention of Jewish thinkers in America because it was so controversial. And this idea was the idea that Jews are God's chosen people. If you think back, you can understand a little bit about why it was so controversial, because here you get the 1920s and 30s, and Jews are trying to make it in the United States, and they think that for the first time, we really have a chance of being accepted by a Gentile society. And it just was not good PR to tell the people that you want to be part of that you have to be apart from them because you're special. Even though the theologians interpreted this in other ways, to the common person, the chosen people idea means that Jews are claiming to be better or that God loves you more. And that did not go down very well. And during World War II, some of you may know this or remember it or have heard about it, there were these obscene claims that the Jews were responsible for Nazism because the Jews taught that we were a chosen people. And so that's where the Nazis got the idea about the Aryan race. And so it was really our fault. And there was a lot of anti-Semitic stuff that said, well, you're clannish, you're exclusivist. So all this stuff about chosenness, that's why there's anti-Semitism, because you yourselves bring it upon you by being so clannish and exclusivist. So I thought that in order to understand my topic, the chosen people, I had to understand something about American Jewish sociology. So I started with a book. I'm going to mention 3 texts that were important to me when I wrote my dissertation in 1975. The first was by one of the greatest American sociologists, Nathan Glazer, who wrote a little book in 1972 called American Judaism. And he begins the book with an expression of wonderment, absolute wonderment, that here there was this tiny group of people, most of whom were the children of immigrants who came to the United States not earlier than 1881. And this tiny group of people had assumed what Glazer called the status of a most favored religion. The Jews had made it by 1972, a great success story. But then Glaser sounds a warning in the opening pages of his study that looms over the book to the end. The era of what he called ethnic churches will not last forever, he predicted. Quote, Jews live in a society that expects to see their ethnic particularity ultimately abandoned and would soon become aware of a contradiction between the kind of society America wants to become and indeed the kind of society most Jews wanted to become and the demands of the Jewish religion. And that contradiction, I argued in my dissertation and in my first book on chosenness, that was responsible for the popularity of the idea of chosenness, because Jews had to be both a part of and apart from, and it was a balancing act, and it was a difficult balancing act to perform. And Glaser, in 1972, was the man who, with Daniel Patrick Moynihan, wrote Beyond the Melting Pot, right? A very eminent sociologist, said the Jews have it good, but it couldn't last forever. And indeed, he was echoing, you found a lot of prominent Protestant thinkers would say the only legitimate religion in America is a religion that tries to get us all to be of that religion. A religion that wanted to be apart ethnically was un-American. And Glaser believed that that was going to be a problem for the Jewish people. And he actually put his finger on something that he thought was a problem that was about to come, which was intermarriage. Intermarriage between Jews and Christians in the 1960s was in single digits, right? And now you know that outside the Orthodox world, 70% of the marriages involving Jews involve a marriage with a non-Jew. And Glaser predicted that that was inevitable. The second text that meant a lot to me was written by not a sociologist, but a rabbi named Arthur Hertzberg, who some of you may know. Hertzberg was the rabbi of a conservative synagogue in Englewood, New Jersey, but he was a prominent historian. He had done a PhD with the great historian Salah Baron about the anti-Semitism of the French Enlightenment. And he was very active in Israeli causes. He wrote, op-ed pieces all the time. And he had expressed his view of Judaism in America in an article in 1964 that bore the controversial title, America is Galut. The word Galut means exile. And Hertzberg claimed in this article that the future of Judaism was not compatible with the version of the American dream held by the majority of Jews and encouraged by what he called the Jewish establishment, namely the idea that Jews in America should be just like everybody else, with the equivalent of the Zionist idea that Jews should be a normal people. And Hertzberg said, Judaism cannot survive if Jews are just like everybody else. He said, if you do that, you're on a way station, I'm quoting from him, on a slow, seemingly inexorable road to evaporation. That was his word for the disappearance of the Jews. American Jews were living out a variation of the classic concept of galut. They could not go on this way for long. A Jewish community could survive, I'm quoting, only by emphasizing what is unique to itself and by convincing its children that that uniqueness is worth having. So I told you I did my dissertation in Israel, and while I was working on the chosen people idea, I discovered that in Israel and among the Zionist thinkers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the concept of galut or exile was everywhere, it was ubiquitous. Hertzberg's article from 1964 was one of a handful, a literal handful of articles by American Jewish leaders that talked about the concept of exile. So for a scholar of religious studies, this is fascinating, right? How do you have a tradition called Judaism, and it has these two branches, and the branch in America does not have any interest in the concept that the branch in Israel makes absolutely central? That was interesting academically, and that was the basis of a book of mine. But again, my research was provoked by this. How is it that American Jews are so determined to be like everybody else that they've decided to downplay the contention that America It's part of the history of exile. We used a neutral term. America is not exile, it's diaspora. In Hebrew, the term golah can mean one or both of those things, but the word golah in Hebrew is cognate with the word galut. So even if you're in a golah and you're thinking about it as a diaspora, the word itself is cognate with the idea of exile. And I found that Israeli thinkers tended to use the ideas interchangeably. The final text that meant a lot to me when I was thinking about how to study American Jews was a book by the sociologist Charles Liebman from 1973 called The Ambivalent American Jew. And Liebman described a community caught between conflicting desires for what he called integration on the one hand, being a part of, and survival on the other hand, being apart from. And he basically said, it's a hard balancing act to maintain. He actually made a claim, this was 1973, that because of this need for the balancing act, the two extremes were not going to be popular. So he could not have predicted the growth of Haredi Judaism. He did not predict that ultra-Orthodoxy would grow to a huge extent, but it's still true to say that even with the astonishing birth rate that ultra-Orthodox Judaism has maintained for a long time now, of 6 to 8 kids per couple, there's still not a large percentage of the American Jewish population. So basically, Liebman was not wrong. You still have not more than, 15% of American Jews who are ultra-Orthodox, probably less. About 14% of Reform affiliated, 14% of 12 or 13% of conservative, and 3 or 4% of modern Orthodox, 1% Reconstructionist, 1% everybody else. But where Liebman underestimated was the extent of assimilation. He would not have been surprised by it, but the number of Jews who decided they don't want to be Jewish anymore is quite astonishing. And Liebman thought that most Jews were going to try to balance themselves between integration and survival, and the two ends were going to be smaller. And we now find, according to the current sociology of American Jews, that what's shrinking in American Jewish life is the middle. Committed reform, conservative, modern Orthodox, Reconstructionists, that part of the Jewish people is shrinking dramatically. And since that part of American Jewry is the part that has sustained the vast majority of American Jewish institutions for the last half century, that is a problem for the organizations and for the federations. You're not going to depend on ultra-Orthodoxy to support those organizations and those federations. So that's the picture I got from the sociologists as I was starting. So you see where I was starting. It wasn't just one historical period in addition to previous historical periods. It was a historical period fraught with tension, and the Jews were experiencing a tension between the desire to fit in. Finally, they're going to give us a chance to fit in. We can finally make it here, but we also don't want to disappear. And that is not an easy thing to have both sides of in the United States. All right, one more preface from the sociologist, which is that Liebman had learned, as I had, from the great sociologist Max Weber, that the average Jew in the pews, as it were, practices by definition what we call folk religion, whereas the theologians and the rabbis and the intellectuals do a more elite kind of religion. And it's very rare that folk religion and elite religion are the same. All right, that's true. But what I found when I studied American Judaism over the next several decades was that the elite theologians were working on a similar problem to the laity. Everybody's trying to figure out how are we going to manage this problem of being distinctive and yet also being a part of a larger society. So now I want to turn to one thing I learned from a teacher I share with Chava, a professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Eliezer Shvai. And Eliezer Shvai taught me a lesson that I pass on to all of my students of modern Judaism. And I think that a lot of American Jews don't know this lesson, but my whole research agenda is based upon it. So I want to start with it and explain a little bit about it. Shvai argued that in the Middle Ages, Jews knew who they were and where they stood. Except for a few people, for the 1,000 years before the modern world, Jews were living under Islam or under Christianity. Sometimes it was bad and you were persecuted or expelled. Other times it was okay. You were second class, right? But you were tolerated. And the dominant religion had a lot in common with you. That was part of the problem. The argument was over who had the final word, right? Who was God's final prophet? But they knew who you were and you knew who you were. And you enter the modern world, it was not clear to Jews or anywhere else or anyone else where Jews would stand in the modern world. So Zweig said that all modern Jewish thought asks two basic questions. One, you might call a political question. Where are Jews going to stand in the world that's viable? Where can we stand in the world that's viable? And the second question is, what kinds of Judaism can we develop that are compatible with these places where we can live viably as a community? So you have a religious question or a theological question, and you have a political question. And Zweig argued that with all of our brilliance, we had only come up with two viable answers to the first question about where Jews could stand. One was in a state of your own. Let's call this Zionism. And the strength of it is that you get to control a lot of the culture in that society. It's in Hebrew, but you have media, you have street names, you have imagery, and most importantly of all, you have language, right? And the only other strategy that was possibly proving successful was the diaspora democracy, in the best case was the United States, and neither was foolproof. So what I learned at the Hebrew University in 1975 was that modern Jewish thought faces two issues, one theological and one political, and there's no secure bet on either one of them. So that is the basis of my research for the last 50 years. So you know perhaps that modern Jewish thought begins with Spinoza, a renegade Jew who was excommunicated for reasons we still don't understand, who wrote a book called The Theological Political Treatise. So both words are in his title. But he's followed 100 years later by the founder of modern Judaism, really the great philosopher Moses Mendelssohn. And Mendelssohn's book is called Jerusalem, but its subtitle is On Religious Power and Judaism. On religious power and Judaism, because Mendelssohn understood that it was a political question. Are they going to let us live or not in the modern world, which was politics? So there's a political question and a theological question. All right, how does this come home to America? So I want to give you a couple examples about how this plays out in America. So one of the two most influential thinkers, I would say, in American Judaism was the great Mordechai Kaplan, who some of you may have known personally. I got to meet him in Jerusalem when he was merely 95 years old. I was 24, 25, and he was 95. And he was an amazing man. He wrote his book, Judaism and the Civilization, because on the one hand, there was a theological crisis in his eyes. He had stopped believing in the kind of God that Jewish tradition taught, and he thought that most other Jews, when they became enlightened and went to university as he had, would also stop believing in that God. He could not believe in a God who revealed the Torah at Mount Sinai. He did not believe in a God who created the world. He did not believe in a God who was going to send the Messiah someday. He did not believe in a God who grants immortality. And so he said, there's a theological crisis in Judaism. Jews have to develop some new purpose in being a Jew now that the aura of divine election, chosenness, has departed from his people. And here's the sociology piece, Kaplan continues, his Jewish origin brings with it nothing but economic handicaps and social inferiority. The Jew rebels against his fate. This was 1934, remember? So Jews were being discriminated against economically, and there was a lot of anti-Semitism around. And Kaplan figured that that is causing a lot of Jews to flee from Judaism. And so the only way to solve it was to change the question from why be a Jew to why should I not be a Jew? And to do that, you had to make Judaism what he called intuitive. And to do that, you had to surround a person with everything Jewish. Jewish history, Jewish arts, Jewish literature, Jewish language, Jewish community. He didn't want to have synagogues like this one. He wanted to have Jewish community centers. As you know, Kaplan was responsible for synagogues changing their name to, I'm from Philadelphia, the Oxford Circle Jewish Community Center, or he was the founding Orthodox rabbi of the Orthodox synagogue on the west side of New York, the Jewish Center, which has a swimming pool. Kaplan was all in favor of this, right? He was famous for the notion of shul, pool, and school, right? Jews should have everything together in one place. And if you want to have separate services, so the Reformed Jews go to one room, and the conservative Jews go to another room, and the Orthodox Jews go to a third room, and then you meet for Kiddush, and everything else you do together. That was his model. But to Kaplan's great credit, he knows in his book that it's probably not going to work. Because Jews don't live in one civilization, in the best of circumstances, in America, they live in two. They live in what he calls an American civilization and in a Jewish civilization. And what's astonishing here in this book, Kaplan says that if you live in America, the dominant civilization in your life will always be America and not Judaism. Judaism will be a subordinate civilization. The pathos of this is enormous. Right, I'm reading this, writing my dissertation, trying to see a future for American Judaism. And here's Kaplan in 1934 telling me that if you ever want to have a dominant Jewish civilization, there's only one thing you can do: go to Palestine. In America, you're going to be subordinate. So what you're going to have is he pleads to Jews to live the maximal amount of Jewishness. But what is maximal, he said, must be left to the judgment and conscience of every individual. What kind of recipe is this for a successful community? Right? So that was 1934, and he's caught in the vicious circle. He's caught between the integration and survival. Well, in my book, Rethinking Modern Judaism, I make the case, based on Schweid and all the people I've mentioned to you thus far, that Jewish decisions about what and how to practice their religion in 20th and 21st century America, as in 19th century Western Europe, were determined in large measure by conscious or unconscious calculations about how distinctive the Jews wished to be from Gentile neighbors and co-workers, how distinctive the practice in question would make them, and what degree of distinctiveness the larger society would tolerate without cost to the social and political acceptance of Jews. That calculus continues in our day, I believe. It's a given of modern diaspora life. Take example. So many Jews hold a Passover Seder in their homes, although not as many as did 20 years ago, but majority of Jews still hold a Passover Seder in their homes, consisting of a ritual that they themselves design or select from the numerous options available. The vast majority of those Jews who hold a Passover Seder at home do not go to synagogue the next morning, where they do not control the ritual that's going to happen. And a small fraction of those who go to synagogue actually abstain from eating bread for the week or take matzah to work, which demonstrates before their non-Jewish friends that they're observing a festival that makes them distinctive. When I did this book, The Jew Within, we interviewed a lot of people and we did a survey of a lot more. And what I learned is that the Jews we interviewed, this is 1997, we're doing the interviews, the book came out in 2000, they will not observe anything that they do not find meaningful at the moment they observe it. It is their right to choose. But what I learned that I hadn't realized before was that so many people told me this. Not only is it their right to choose, it would be wrong of them not to choose. It would be absolutely wrong of them because it would be inauthentic to observe any ritual which they do not find meaningful at the moment they're observing. Which means that every ritual that you're suggesting, Sabbath observance or dietary laws or synagogue attendance or sending your kids to a Jewish school, every single thing you do has to pass before this bar of, is it meaningful to me to do this? How distinctive do I want to be? And how distinctive is this going to make me? I can't tell you how many people, when I was chancellor of JTS, I would have this conversation multiple times every week with people. I had a good friend who said that her litmus test for Hebrew school was, are they going to teach my kids that God chose the Jews? If yes, I'm not sending my kids to this school. I had parents who told me how painful it was to choose between Hebrew school and soccer. Soccer makes you part of the larger world. That's being a part of. Hebrew school sets you apart from. Do I want my kid to be apart from in this way? Or do I want to be a part of? So these are the decisions Jews are making. For whatever the reason, the vast majority of American Jews rarely attend synagogue and observe few, if any, religious practices. The rituals that carry the most meaning to contemporary American Jews are always connected to family, especially to parents and grandparents. That we have statistical evidence for. Nobody disputes that. The greatest source of meaning to contemporary Americans of whatever religious tradition or background is family. So it's not surprising that to Jews, the rituals that mean the most are rituals with family. And we can further say that rituals that carry a universal meaning, like freedom, what is Passover? The holiday of freedom, right? Are going to be more popular than rituals that carry a particular meaning. A particular meaning like the revelation of the Torah, or the Jewish people dwelling in the wilderness in Sukkot. So the ritual not only has to be meaningful at the moment, but in order to be meaningful, it has to have a universal message. All right, so now, having done that lesson, I want to make it clear that I'm not saying, as Kaplan did at times, that religious belief does not matter to contemporary American Jews. Quite the opposite. Kaplan sometimes knew that it mattered. He wrote a book called The Meaning of God in Modern Jewish Religion, and he said, quote, to the modern man, religion can no longer be a matter of entering into relation with the supernatural. So sometimes Kaplan thought, like many people do, okay, it doesn't matter what you believe as long as you practice. It's okay. Just be a member of a community. Theology doesn't matter. But other times, his intellectual integrity got the best of him, and he cared about theology a lot. And I find, having been chancellor of JTS and having been privileged to hold literally hundreds and hundreds of conversations with American Jews, most of them conservative, but not all, about religion, I find that American Jews do care about this. And the Jew Within did a survey, a representative sample of 10,000 people. And it turns out that the majority of Americans not only believe in God, but say they pray to God on occasion. God doesn't mean any one thing to American Jews. Of course not. It doesn't mean any one thing to Jewish theology. Their beliefs are inchoate. They're what a teacher of mine called sacred fragments. They're not putting things together. It's not systematic theology, but there is theology there. So Heschel, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who shared the halls and classrooms of the Jewish Theological Seminary with Kaplan in the 1950s, they saw each other every day, and sometimes they were on speaking terms and sometimes they weren't. Right? It's sad in retrospect because they both had the same students, and the students could love both of them, but they themselves were sometimes talking to each other and sometimes attacking each other publicly. But Heschel believed in the kind of God that Kaplan thought was supernatural and therefore impossible. For Heschel, as for many other theologians and believers of his time and ours, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, faith and reason were separate domains. I quoted this line this morning. It's a line that I love from Heschel. The search of reason ends at the shore of the known. On the immense expanse beyond it, only the sense of the ineffable can glide. Philosophy was not the way to God. Faith involves a human faculty other than reason that we call soul. Experience tells us that God exists. Our mind, quote, is like a fantastic seashell. And when we apply our ear to its lips, we hear a perpetual murmur from the waves beyond the shore. If we are attentive to such divine signals, we arrive at the conviction that God is present in our world. Quote, the problem, he said, is how do we tell it to our minds? Well, Heschel's move in that paragraph is something that is familiar to any student of modern thought, Jewish or Christian. Many people in the modern West turn from systematic theology to personal experience. You experience something of the divine, something of the transcendent, something of the beyond, something of what William James called the more. And if I had time tonight, I would take you through a set of examples that I'm teaching now in my course at JTS on American Jewish thought. Everyone testifies to religious experience. Everyone from New Age Jews, like Arthur Green, to feminist Jews, like one of the founders of Jewish feminism, Judith Plaskow, says you can rely on the text, but the text leaves the women out, right? Moses says, as the revelation of Sinai is about to happen, do not go near a woman. So Plaskow says, but we know that women were there, and women have been Jewish for thousands of years since, so we have to be there. So her phrase for this is, we stand on the ground of our experience. Our experience tells us the text is not adequate to the truth. And I can give you countless examples by contemporary Jewish and also Christian thinkers who make this appeal to experience. So I'm concluding this way about this. The fact that Christian theologians have wrestled with similar issues of faith and doubt and developed parallel strategies for dealing with them demonstrates that factors other than the conflicting desires for integration and survival have driven Jewish religious thought. In other words, I'm a professor of religious thought who takes Jewish religious thought very seriously. I take the Jewish religious thought of the folk and not just of the elite very seriously. And when I was chancellor of JTS, I had the opportunity to test my own theory. I believed, and we know from what I did that I'm right about this, that one of the most meaningful concepts to Jews today is the concept of mitzvah, or as a lot of people pronounce it, mitzvah. So I started an initiative that got Jews all over the United States talking about mitzvah together, studying the history of mitzvah together, learning that mitzvah has a lot of different meanings in Jewish tradition, and then doing mitzvah together. So you would study the mitzvot of like visiting the sick, and you would go to visit the sick together, and then you would talk together about what this mitzvah means to you and what the ground of it is. What is the source of this authority, of this commandment? And we learned a lot from these discussions. The first thing we learned was that most of these Jews had never in their entire adult lives had this discussion before. And the vast majority of the discussions were led by rabbis who said that they had never in their lives had these discussions with their congregants before. So I conclude from this, there's a lot of serious religious thought out there, and we don't get it because we don't talk about it. We don't ask about it. A lot of people are uncomfortable with it, so we're just not getting it, but it's there. So my bottom line, I come out the other end. I take Schweid's two issues both very seriously. On the one hand, what Jews do is a political act, consciously or unconsciously. How distinctive do I want to be? How distinctive do I think Gentile society will let me to be? How much anti-Semitism am I willing to risk by being distinctive? And on the other hand, it's a theological question. What do I believe? How do I want to serve God? However I understand God, how do I want to connect to the ultimate truth of life? And the sociologists are not adequate because they didn't take this religious stuff as seriously as I think they should have. There's another great essay by Judith Plaskow in dialogue with Cynthia Ozick, the author, where Cynthia Ozick says, for Jewish feminism, the question is sociological. How are we going to get the community to make room for women? And Plaskow says, no. The title is The Right Question is Theological. Because if you have people using only male pronouns for God and male imagery for God, no matter how many women rabbis you have, you're not going to change the situation of women in Judaism. You have to change the idea that God is somehow male. Well, if I had more time, I would show you how Abraham Joshua Heschel, my hero, brought together theology and politics. You know, he's famous for saying that when he marched in Selma, Alabama, beside Martin Luther King Jr., his legs were praying, right? My legs were praying. And I've taught a course in Heschel's theology and King's theology, and I can show you in detail how Heschel made the leap from belief in God to that kind of activism. All right, so that's where I think things stood. Everything I just said was true on October the 6th. And a lot of it is still true on October the 7th. And I just want to say a few words about that before I wrap it up. We're in a different age. And because of both the politics and the theology, Jews have never not responded theologically to changes in Jewish history. Once the chosen people idea was no longer the most popular religious idea in America, it was overtaken, as you would all guess, by the Holocaust. It was about 20 years in American Jewish thought when the dominant question by far was, where was God in the Holocaust? Most of the religious thinkers that I respect said, we have no idea. We can't answer that question. God was hiding. God's callous. We don't know. And I would wager, we do not have data on this. Maybe every rabbi I know has an opinion about this. But the most significant change in most Jewish services in the last 15 or 20 years have been prayers for healing. I believe anecdotally that the most emotional moment for many Jews in a synagogue service on the Sabbath is the healing prayer. And Debbie Friedman gave us a great melody for the healing prayer. I mean, and there are other melodies that are popular. But if you ask the Jews who stand in place to recite the healing prayer, if they actually believe that God hears prayer and heals, most of them, I bet you, would say they don't know. But that's not going to stop them from offering the prayer. Right? So you have a very complex relationship between belief in God and what you're actually going to do as a Jew. So what difference is October the 7th going to make? Well, I'm going to make 3 or 4 claims about this very quickly and then throw the floor open to all your questions. First claim, Jews have disagreed about God and all things theological forever, and that's certainly true in America, but the most dominant religion of Jews the world over, and especially in the United States, which I call the Jewish civil religion. The Jewish civil religion since 1967 has been Am Yisrael Chai. The Jewish people lives. And it's not surprising because the most important religious symbol of all is life. And the state of Israel literally meant life after death. But all the other claims that Israel made, all the other symbols of Israel, like from the making the deserts bloom, to the high-tech revolution, there are lots of them, the birth of the Hebrew language. How do you revive a dead language? It's all about life after death. And Israel, being born in 1948, 3 years after Auschwitz, is life after death. And this is the challenge of October the 7th. October the 7th was death. And Israel could not protect itself from death. Changes the nature of Israel. And there are already religious people in Israel writing articles, where was God on October the 7th? Not a theology I recommend pursuing, but we'll know if this all ends anytime soon, what the answer to that question is going to be to some people. But I believe that this has challenged the fundamental significance of Israel to American Jews. It's not just that Israel was the insurance policy for American Jews and, it's a booster for Jewish identity. Israel means life after death for the Jewish people. And I think that's why October the 7th was such a profound challenge to us, because it was brought upon us. If it had been done by the PLO, it would have been different. Because the PLO may want to destroy the state of Israel, but Hamas wants to kill Jews everywhere. So we felt it as a blow directly. And the fact that a lot of people don't get that has been especially painful to Jews. But number 2, we are probably going to see in the next few years, I think, more quest for God. At times of crisis, people tend to invoke religious issues. It happened in the wake of World War II and the Holocaust. There was a revival of interest in religion. I think our world is scary now and getting scarier all the time. So I don't think we're going to have less religious thought right now. I think we're going to have more. And I think we're going to see some Jews run away from the Jewish community right now, but we're going to have other Jews running to the Jewish community. Because if you have anti-Semitism spiking the way that it has, and you have all sorts of people you thought were your friends not supporting you at this particular point, you're going to turn more to Jews. You're either going to hide more or turn more to Jews. Ultra-Orthodoxy is not going to stop growing anytime soon. And the demographers tell us that given the birth rate now, which a new generation comes about when people are 18 or 19 years old, That's not going to stop, which means that the growth of ultra-Orthodoxy and the relative decline of everybody else in the Jewish world is going to continue for some time to come, and that's going to perhaps have profound consequences. Ambivalence about Judaism will continue. How can you not be ambivalent about Judaism when you're ambivalent about absolutely everything? You're ambivalent about your government, you're ambivalent about the media, you're ambivalent about your culture, you're ambivalent. Children, let's face it, adult children, I'm now a grandparent. Adult children are ambivalent about their parents having a role in the raising of their grandchildren, right? The best advice we ever got was don't say a word, right? You're a grandparent now, don't say a word. There's ambivalence everywhere. So of course there's going to be ambivalence about Jews, but, and here's my optimism. This is my optimism. Jews have never relied on numbers. That is the secret of optimism. Jews have never relied on numbers. So this is going to sound crass. And if you lose 1 million American Jews, but that million were part of the group that never belonged to anything, you haven't lost them to the strength of the community. The community is no weaker. I'm sorry for those people. And I'm very sorry to report that there are a couple million Americans out there right now who have at least one Jewish parent, and in some cases two. And if you ask them if they're Jews, they'll say no. Have at least one Jewish parent and sometimes two. And if you ask them if they're Jews, they'll say no. That is a tragedy to me. That means that something went wrong in those cases. But we're not here for numbers. And so the source of my sober optimism about the future of American Jewry is we have an incredible tradition. Our people has done incredible things in the world and still is. American Jewry, for all that it may have passed its golden age, according to this Atlantic article, is still an amazing success story. We're still here. So if we play our cards right and create a younger generation with pride about being who they are, absolutely nothing to fear. And if there are 1 million less Jews 10 years from now than there were 10 years ago, it's okay. We should not worry about the future of Judaism in America. The question is what you and I are going to do today and tomorrow to secure the future of Judaism in America. And that's the only question that's significant. Thank you all.
Can one be a Jew and not believe in God?
Yes. A long tradition. I mean, it's a fact. There's just, there've been millions of us who, so yes.
Second question, can one be a Jew, not believe in God, and not believe in Am Yisrael High?
It's very difficult. So I think I said this morning that one of my very favorite lines in the Talmud, which they put into the mouth of God, God says, if they abandon me, let them keep my commandments, which I take to be a recognition by the rabbis 2,000 years ago that faith is hard. Faith is always hard. And so there are going to be people who are going to turn their backs on God. I can't tell you how many people I know who turned their backs on God because of things God did or didn't do in their eyes. But if you turn your back on God, does that mean you stop practicing the tradition? Right? Why would you want to do that? And so if you give up religion and you give up connection to the Jewish people, if you give up both of those things, what's left to you? So we are a people that survives because of strong tradition and strong community. Those are our keywords. Those are our mantras, tradition and community. Right? And I tell the story of a friend of mine who was a teacher, who was a Protestant, who lost his faith and used to come to our Passover Seder every year. And one year said to me, I sometimes wish I were Jewish. And I said, why? He said, because when I lost my faith, my church had nothing for me and I stopped going. But I know if I were Jewish and I lost my faith, I would still have my community. And that was a very perceptive recognition on his part. So that's what we have going for us. The problem is right now, in order to have the community, you're choosing particularism. You're choosing distinctiveness. And for many Jews, that's not a popular choice. And so is anti-Semitism going to make that a more popular choice or a less popular choice? And we still don't know because we have both experiences in our history. So I think that's where we are. Yeah.
Final question on this series. Can one be a Jew who believes in God, but doesn't believe in Am Yisrael High? And Israel is the Jewish homeland.
So you can say you believe in God But then the question is, do you believe that God has any message for you? So you could believe in God, it's perfectly conceivable, and believe that God has only a universal message or a human message, that God doesn't want me to have any relationship in particular to Jews as opposed to anybody else, right? That's conceivable, sure. But most of this, you're going to have a hard time finding grounding in this tradition, because this tradition is so built on connection to other Jews. Right, that's the history, and it's very difficult to get rid of all of that. There have been Jews who tried. Look at ethical culture. Right, the ethical culture movement is founded by Jews who say, okay, we want to have all the ethical principles of Judaism, and maybe even God, without the Jewish piece. Let's not be distinctive anymore. And those people are not Jews, and so it's hard to do what you want to do. Everything's possible, but we're not going to succeed that way. That's not a recipe for success, I don't think. But these are the questions that we all face. And if you have kids and grandchildren, these are the inevitable questions.
First of all, thank you very much. A lot of very interesting points. My question is, when you talk about Jews believing, not believing, and I come from more traditional, well, I grew up in Israel, so I had nothing, no Judaism, but now I'm more observant. Identify, it was interesting what he was saying. What is a Jew? Who is a Jew? I mean, I know according to more orthodoxy, then a Jew is somebody that's born or converted. So what is your definition of a Jew?
No, that's
No what?
When I was the chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary, right, and JTS follows the halakha, right, follows Jewish law. So you know what Jewish law has to say about who a Jew is, okay? And unlike the Reform movement, the conservative movement does not follow patrilineal descent. Right? But if you're asking me as a teacher of Jews and of young people, many of whom have non-Jewish mothers and Jewish fathers, and want to serve the Jewish people and want to identify with Judaism, I want them. I want those people. So my definition of Judaism can't leave them out. So partly the answer is depending on circumstance, how I'm going to answer that question. But one of the frustrating things about being a Jewish studies professor, maybe it's a good thing, you get these questions, quote, what does Judaism say about X? And like a broken record, you over and over again say there's no such thing as what does Judaism say about X, because there's no such thing as one Judaism. There's no Pope. There are no councils of Trent. There's no right? We don't have one authority. So what do Jews say about the world to come? Well, there are lots of different opinions. What is the Messiah going to be? Well, there are lots of different opinions, and I can give you the different sources. So two Jews, a lot more than three opinions. And that is a problem, but it's also a strength. And I argue that has kept us going. Yes. Yes, of course.
Okay,
I work within a tradition. I don't answer questions. I ask questions. Yes. Well, I didn't defend O.J. Simpson, so in that respect, I'm not Alan Dershowitz, but other respects, yes.
Okay, I'm going to read one of the questions from
please.
online, and then we'll go back, and I'll go back and forth. So, this is from Carl Goldberg. How does the future of Jews in America relate to the increasing numbers and influence of the American Muslim community, which is overwhelmingly anti-Israel and anti-Semitic?
So in the first question, there will, in the not too distant future, be more Muslims in America than there are Jews. Apparently, the demographers believe there are not yet. And then the question is, can we Jews continue to punch above our weight, as the expression goes? We Jews exercise influence in America far beyond our numbers, and that has always been a survival strategy for Jews and for Judaism. We're more active in more organizations. We got to be in order to make our voices heard. And so even when there are more Muslims than there are Jews, the question is, how effective will they be in marshaling support for Muslims in America? And let's not project the future as the linear extension of the present. That is a mistake. The future is not like the present, only more so. The future is by definition different than the present. So for example, when you talk to American Muslims who are not extremists, they have a problem in convincing their children to stay Muslim. They don't want to go to the mosque. They don't want to fast on Ramadan. They want to do all sorts of stuff like American kids do. So how effective will the Muslims be in getting their kids to study the Quran in Arabic? Right. I talk to Chinese families, and how effective will they be in getting their kids to learn Chinese? Second or third generation Chinese American families, right? So this is not a foreordained question. Similarly, I would have to say that if we cannot solve the conflict between Israel and its neighbors, we got a problem that's worse than the one that the question asked. We've got to find a way to solve this. You cannot go on being surrounded by hundreds of millions of people who don't want you there and are willing to kill you to get you out of there. That can't last forever, and it's already, I think, in crisis mode. So we have to find a solution to that. And if when we do, it could well be that the relations between Jews and Muslims will get better. I did some work at JTS. We did a lot of attention. There are liberal Muslims. And I still think it was very important for the Jews to have allies in every community, including the Muslim community. And the fact that liberal Muslims talk to more extreme Muslims should not stop us from talking to liberal Muslims. I want allies, and we have a lot to learn from them, and they have a lot to learn from us.
My question relates to your comments on the previous question. I've heard it said, I've read that the existential threat, not just to Jews, but to the Judeo-Christian Western civilization is Islam, that has not evolved to be tolerant of people that believe differently. And that is obviously worrisome.
Yeah, that case can be made, and that's Huntington's thesis to begin with, right? The clash of civilizations. And it's too much of a generalization for me to accept it. But also, again, I don't believe the future is inevitable. The future is open. I mean, did you predict AI 10 years from now? I mean, you did. I don't know anybody else who did, right? What was going on? So my lesson is that we just don't know, and we should work hard to see the kind of future that we want to see, instead of assuming the future is going to be our fears. So if what you described is true, we're done. Because there's over 1 billion Muslims and there are 15 million Jews, and the Iranians are going to have nuclear weapons. Those seem to be facts, right? And so what's going to be? I don't know. And it could be terrible and for the entire West, or it could be that the West gets its act together and manages to defend itself. I know people, all sorts of people who 5 years ago were predicting that Chinese dominance was inevitable. And now all of a sudden, we see all the internal problems that China has, and Chinese dominance is no longer seen as inevitable, right? So I don't know. I find some grounds for optimism in this. I just want to be smart. And too often we're not smart enough. We're supposed to be so smart, but where's our smarts?
Wait, we don't have a microphone that people
The
want.
anecdote,
I
great.
need to share an anecdote. So when I
Please.
was a student, took a year leave from medical school and was in Israel, and we had a series of lectures. And what you just said, Israel has to find a way to make peace with their neighbors. A sociologist gave us a talk and said, you haven't seen anything. When Israel has peace with their neighbors, you'll see the internal wars in
Yeah.
Israel. And, you know, they flare up.
Right. But they're already flaring up without peace with their
Of
neighbors.
course, yeah.
Right. And the two are related. The two things are related. And somebody was talking to me today. There has always been Jewish self-hatred at times of anti-Semitism. We saw it in Germany, a lot of it. Are we going to see that in the United States? I hope not, but the precedent is not good. So what you're seeing in part in Israel is an effect of the crisis. Why are Israelis at each other's throats? Because the situation is not good. If the situation were calmer, you know, people in a better situation are more tolerant of diversity and disorder, and let the Haredim do their thing. And, you know, but that's not the situation right now.
Okay, so the next question's from David Cater. My question may be premature given I'm offering it towards the start of Eisen's lecture. However, given his focus on what Judaism Jews ought to be, leads me to a question based on the book I am currently reading. I don't know if it's Danielle or David Hartman, which Hartman, I'm not here.
It's probably Danielle Hartman.
So who are the Jews and who can we become? In which he sees a synthesis of what he refers to as the Genesis covenant and the Exodus covenant as required to permit Jewish diversity to be a virtue and not a vice.
So I haven't read the book. I don't know what it is, but the idea that diversity is a virtue and not a vice, it has been both in our history. But when you think about it, let me just, it was a brilliant move that our sages made 2,000 years ago when they said there's certain things we have to agree upon. They called that halakha. We have to know if we can eat this chicken or not. We have to know if we can marry this person or not. But we do not have to know what the Messiah is. We do not have to know what's going to happen in the world to come. We'll find out when we get there. We do not have to know why there's evil in the world and suffering. These things we do not have to know. So they called that agadah. So some things you have to have clarity on, and you have to have agreement on, and other things you don't. And the fact that you can agree on some things that are behavioral gives you more freedom to think freely on the things you don't have to agree about. That was a bit of profound wisdom on their part. And that served us well until now there's almost nothing we all agree on behaviorally or in any other way. So diversity is great. And I think the book of Genesis turns out to be, in many ways, very profound, not only because of the way it imagines the creation, but because it assumes that diversity is God's will for the human species. Right? So if you're going to be a people scattered all over the world, over the course of 2,000 years, you're going to have incredible diversity. So you have to have enough to keep you together. If you're a Jewish merchant traveling from Morocco to Poland, right, you have to know that you can eat when you get to Poland. But you don't have to agree on the meaning of the prayers when you get to Poland. Right? So Jews have found this balance in the past between unanimity and diversity, and we are struggling to find it right now. Purists are not a good recipe for communal. We don't want to be purists. We don't want to say, oh, we're right and everybody else is wrong, and therefore we want nothing to do with them. If you can't tolerate people who are different, then you're in trouble. Anybody been married? I mean, do husbands and wives agree? I mean, what is so counterfactual to think that the people closest to you, do your children agree with you? Do they agree with one another? Do you agree with yourself? Right. Solomon Schechter had a line to the students at JTS. He said, young man, they were all men then, how dare you always agree with me? How dare you always agree with me? I like that line.
Do you agree that many, if not most, conflicts throughout history have at the root of the conflict religious differences? And do you also agree that most religions, most contemporary religions, and even those that have floundered along the way were founded when humanity didn't know very much? We were pretty stupid scientifically, and the religions were founded on the basis of power and control. And now the impossible question.
The first two are pretty difficult as it was. What's worse?
Those two are pretty difficult.
What do you got that's worse for me?
The final question is, not as a Jew, but as a thinking person, do you believe that humanity would be better off today, knowing what we know, if we could strike all religion from human memory and we would come together as human beings and have ethical practices irrespective of our differences of religion?
Well, you just attached a condition, which is the impossible one. You said, if we all have ethical practices. So your questions are beyond my grade level, right? They're the eternal questions that are very difficult questions. I am a religious human being. I want to serve God to the best of my ability and believe there are many other people out there who do that from many different religions. And some of the greatest acts of kindness and generosity in the world are done by people who do them out of their faith commitments. Some of the greatest acts of cruelty and obscenity and intolerance and persecution are done in the name of religion. I can't let religion off the hook. I can't let Judaism off the hook. I can't defend all religion. I can't defend all Judaism. Sometimes I think religion is the cause. Other times I think religion is the rationalization. So this is a study that the scientists in the room can say more about than me, but there seems to be human aggression. There just seems to be something in us which wants to destroy things and destroy other people and sometimes destroy ourselves. Freud talks about this. Anthropologists talk about this. To the best of my small knowledge, there seems to be truth in this. And so when religion is operating at its best, religion elevates people and teaches them love and teaches them justice. But religion is a human creation, and therefore it's not always at its best. Quite the opposite. So religion has been a great teacher of intolerance. And here I agree with you that 9 times out of 10, religion does not teach tolerance and love for people who are different. It has a very bad track record on this. But would we get better if we eliminated religion? So then look at the 20th century. So was Nazism religious? No, I would say it was anti-religious. Some people would say, well, it became a religion, but that's stretching the term. Was Stalinism a religion? No, it was the opposite of religion. And you cannot imagine more cruelty and more murders than in those 2 totalitarian states, empires. So it's not religion that's the cause all the time. Often religion is the excuse. And my generalization is we want to invoke the highest thing we know to justify the behavior, which is the lowest behavior we're capable of. And the lowest behavior we're capable of is murder and rape and all these terrible things people do. And so we want to say God told us to do them because that's the highest we know. That seems to be something built into human nature. So human nature is not a simple thing. So I'm going to say one more word of sermon here that your question provokes. To me, the Passover Haggadah is all about your question. Are we ever going to come to a better place? Will the human race ever find redemption? And I think the most profound thing in the Haggadah is Chad Gadya, the end, which we sing when we're all drunk with 4 cups of wine, and you sing it as a round and you make animal noises. But what's the message of Chad Gadya? One thing beats and burns and kills another thing. And when's it going to end? When the angel of death kills the slaughterer and God kills the angel of death. That's when the human race will find redemption. When God kills the angel of death. That's profound to me. That's a great lesson. It may be hopeless, but until then, we're going to do our best to do our part and make the world better as best we can. And so, you know, with religion, without religion, I don't think John Lennon had it right. Imagine all the right? I don't think that a world without religion would be a much better world. No, I think it would be just as bad. Maybe not better, maybe not worse, but just as bad.
Okay, I'm going to go to another online question. This is from Shirley Frank, and she is asking, is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism?
So if you'd asked me this a year ago, if you asked me this on October the 6th, I would say not necessarily, often, but not necessarily. And I still say that that's true in many cases, but the 2 things are blurring for all sorts of reasons. So, as I said before, Hamas is not merely an anti-Zionist group. It's the Muslim Brotherhood. It's an anti-Jewish group. It wants to take over the world with a caliphate. It does not want to have Western civilization. And so the failure of most people to understand this is very irksome. It's very irksome. They think, and you saw this in the demonstrations on campus, that if you're a supporter of Israel, you are aiding and abetting a racist, colonialist, genocidal state. And therefore, by being a Jew, you are guilty of being a Zionist. And the only truth in that is that we American Jews have supported Israel. And so in a sense, we are complicit. I think we have to recognize this, that we are partly responsible. We sent funds, we sent our children, we sent our moral support. We supported this place. It's a dream. It's the dream of our lives to have this state of Israel. So we are identified with it. And we know now that we're part of a common fate, what the great Rabbi Soloveitchik called the Brit Goral, the covenant of fate. The fate of Israel is our fate. We are linked by fate. We can't escape their fate. It's our fate too. Take Israel away, American Jewry does not stand. So it's one fate. And I think after October the 7th, it's clear to most people that there's more connection than we thought there was between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. But still, I wouldn't use anti-Semitism blithely. I would just try to understand it, know what we're up against, and see why are people resentful of Jews, and not apologize. We're not going to apologize for being ourselves. If you're against Israel because you sincerely disagree with its policies, but don't deny the fact that the Jewish people has the right to a homeland like everybody else, then that's not anti-Semitic. But it's a really difficult problem. And as I said, I'll repeat myself, it was a much easier question to answer on October the 6th than it is now. And I think that we're all going to be wrestling with this question for many years to come, sadly. But when you're saying, if you're saying from the river to the sea and you know what you're saying, which most of the people saying it do not know what they're saying, are you assuming that those 7 million Jews there or 8 million Jews there are going to just disappear? Are you assuming that a Palestinian state is going to treat them with kid gloves and welcome them with open arms and say how wonderful it is to have you there? Or are you saying, I don't give a damn if they're killed? Is that what you're saying? I don't care if half the Jews in the world are killed? Is that what you're saying? Let them scatter to the four corners of the earth and be denied immigration visas? I don't care. Is that what you're saying? So we have every right to be upset by this slogan.
As we all know, the ultra-religious men in Israel refused to enter the IDF. And I did read just very recently that a Sephardic rabbi said that then they'll just leave the country. Is anything we can, because they have to study Torah all the time. Why can't they study Torah 23 hours a day and also be in the IDF? My other question is, I don't understand, why is Israel responsible to take care of the Palestinians in Gaza?
Well, the second question, I mean, somebody has to take care of them, right? And the problem is if the Israelis, the day after, if there is a day after, maintain control, they will by de facto have responsibility for making sure that their humanitarian needs are met. That's just the way international law works. And if you're occupying a country and you're the dominant power and you're taking away so you have some responsibility, exactly where it ends and how much is the United States and how much is the Saudis, et cetera, those all seem to me technicalities. But it's not unreasonable to say the Israelis have to have some concern here. But the Haredim, see, here's another example of where tomorrow is not going to be the same as today or yesterday. So what you do, you don't have to draft Haredim into the army, and the army, to tell you the truth, doesn't want all these Haredim because then you have to take people who don't have any education, don't have any secular education, and you have to give them skills in Hebrew and in math and all sorts of things before you can make soldiers out of them, which is a massive project. So, but what you do see is more Haredi Jews entering the workforce in Israel. How do you get still more Haredi Jews entering the workforce? Stop subsidizing their housing and their education and all sorts of other things. So that's happening because of their power in the government. So instead of fighting the fight about putting Haredim in the army, cut the budget to Haredi schools and housing ministry and et cetera, and family support. And then they won't be able to have the families that they have. And the grown men will not, in these hundreds of thousands, be able to spend their entire lives studying instead of working. That will be a change to society. And many Israelis I know think that that change is happening. Slowly but surely, that change is happening. So that's grounds for optimism. I'm always happy to point out, see, there are grounds for optimism. Some things do change for the better.
Okay, another one online, and then we're gonna do, there's 2 more questions in the room, 2 more questions online, and then we'll let Hava wrap us up. So, this is from David Goldstein. What role has Chabad played in the continuity of Judaism in the United States?
Well, it's a major role. I would have said apart from Mordechai Kaplan, the other Jewish thinker in America with the greatest influence is the Rebbe. Rabbi Menachem Schneerson has had an enormous influence, sending out thousands of emissaries. And there are many American Jews, including many on campuses around the country, who are touched by Chabad. Now, Chabad does not make them into Chabadniks. They do not become Hasidic Jews. And there's an argument to be made that some of them are turned off to other kinds of Judaism because they are taught to believe that the only kind of Judaism that's worthwhile is Chabad, and they have no intention of being Chabad. So they choose nothing, which is, we don't have the data to prove that Chabad has been a positive force, but I believe that if they succeed in instilling Jewish pride, then they're being a positive force. And they were ahead of the game when they put these Chanukiot in public squares. And everybody like me who's in favor of church-state separation in the United States, because I thought it's been a mainstay of Jewish life, was against Chabad having lighting Hanukkah candles on the city hall grounds in many cities in the United States. But with the current Supreme Court breaking down the barrier between church and state, I don't think Chabad was doing such a bad thing. So a lot of people that want to make America a Christian country. So Chabad may have been on the right track.
Dr. Eisen, thanks for the great overview of American Jewry over the last few decades. You touched a little bit on changes since October 7th. Can you identify with the 1 or 2 significant studies that stuck out describing the changes in American Jewry since October 7th?
Have you read a significant study? I've read a few. And what my sociologist friends tell me is that the sample size is not reliable and the studies are flawed. I have not seen things. It's too soon, and we're not out of it yet. It's just too soon. It's frustrating. So we don't know yet how Jews are reacting to this. I mean, we know what happens. Jews flock to synagogues and and there was a rise in anti-Semitism. But we don't know. I think it's too soon. I think the answer to your question is, if you see some, let me know. But I haven't seen them yet. It's too soon to tell.
Okay, so the last online question for the night is from Robert Olesh. Do you believe the greatest danger to the Jewish people are other Jews?
Why would I believe that?
This is his question. I'm just asking it.
Do I think that the greatest danger to the Jewish people are other Jews?
I think maybe he's referring to, I can't speak for him, but there's a lot of Jews involved in the BDS movement.
So that is a relatively small number of Jews with a relatively minor influence that we tend to worry about them, but it's relatively small numbers. Let's not worry about that. When we interview Jews for our book, The Jew Within, we always ask the question, what is the thing you like the least about other Jews? And the answer was, the thing I like least is my in-laws telling me that I'm not a good enough Jew. So in that sense, Jews are not helpful in being judgmental about the Jewish lives that other Jews are leading. But we have so many things to worry about in the world that I would not put other Jews at the top of my worry list. If you get upset because people are disagreeing with you, you're in the wrong business, kind of, like, got to get used to it. We have more questions. One more question here. Yes?
One more.
Last question.
The first shall be last and the last shall be first. Every time I come to synagogue, I look to the bema and I see the American flag on the right side and the Israeli flag on the left side. I take great pride in that. But I wonder, when a non-Jew comes into a synagogue and sees the Israeli flag, is it legitimate for the non-Jew to question the loyalty of Jews to the United States?
Well, it's okay to question it, but this has been something that has been asked of us since the modern period. So one of the great documents in Jewish history is that letter from George Washington to the Newport Synagogue in 1790, where he says, "I'm not here to tolerate you. You have as much right to be here as I do." No Gentile ruler has ever said that to a Jewish community in the entire history of the Jews before this. And so what the American flag represents is gratitude and a confidence and an aspiration that we can help make America live up to ideals which are the best of America and the best of Judaism together. And what that Israeli flag is saying is Am Yisrael Chai, that we will combine things that other people do not combine, which is we are loyal to this country, but we have another connection to a people that throughout its history has claimed to have some connection to God. And I think that the sad truth underneath your question is that being different is never accepted easily by other people. And try as we might, there is no analogy among other Americans to this Jewish loyalty to a state, because we have all along claimed that we are a religion and we are a people, that we are both. And we're living in a country where Christianity became a world religion by departing from Judaism, by not being the religion of a people anymore. Islam is much more similar to Judaism in that respect. Muslims are part of an Islamic ummah. They're part of a nation, of a Muslim nation. Indeed, that's part of our problem with Hamas, that they want to impose this Muslim nation on the entire world, but certainly on the Middle East. So I think we're never going, I say we're never going to, never is a long time. Throughout the modern period, this question has always been posed to Jews as a challenge. Are you a state within a state? Are you a nation within a nation? Can you be loyal to America at the same time as you're loyal to Israel? And we just have to keep showing that, yes, we can be, and we are. There's not going to be any theoretical answer that's going to satisfy anybody. But the last thing I'll say about your question is I know Jews who are upset. I know Jews who don't want either of those flags on the beam. They say these flags are states, and Judaism is above a state. We're a faith. We're about ethics. We're about God. We're about spirituality. We are not about politics. So they want to take away the prayer for Israel, take away the prayer for America, take the flags off the bima, and let's be spiritual together. That to me is a non-story. A non-story. Spiritual, yeah. I don't think it goes that way. Chava, you want to say a word?
Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
for a very enlightening and informed and inspiring lecture. May I say one word about Jewish pride? Maybe there's a connection between Jewish pride and Jewish knowledge. And the problem right now is most of us, definitely our students, are simply ignorant, too ignorant of the richness of this tradition. And that's our tragedy, but we can turn it around by doing precisely what we are doing right now. So thank you again, Arnie, and thank you for the Eckstein family for being with Jewish Studies for all those years. And I would like to thank Temple High for hosting this program. I look forward for more activities. And last but not least, thank you, Lisa, for doing all the logistics, for hosting Arnie, and for doing everything else also in Jewish Studies. We're going to end this wonderful evening with a reception. You can go through this door, please. And stay tuned to activities of Jewish Studies. I'm going to publicize my own talk, actually. Oh, I'm sorry. So on March 27, I was just saying I will give a lecture on Zoom. It's going to be entirely on Zoom, and it's on modern Jewish philosophy and the challenges of modernity. So we will pick up some of the issues that Professor Eisen has shared with us this evening, and there is more to know and more to learn. So please join us, go and learn. Take care.